From this moment on, you will now be known as Sharkbait.
Sharkbait! Ooh-ha-ha!
Welcome, brother Sharkbait.
Sharkbait! Ooh-ha-ha!
Enough with the Sharkbait.
Sharkbait! Ooh, bop, badu.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of the types of fish food and give you a little background if you don't already know what options you have to feed your fish. Well, first and foremost, I talked a little bit about flakes. Omega-1 is a very good product. I also use a few others, based on what the ingredients are. But let's talk about the flakes. Flake foods, you'll find all kind of flakes. You'll find flakes for bettas. You'll find flakes for saltwater fish. You'll find flakes for freshwater fish. And one of the reasons I'm talking about flakes is because one of the most often overlooked pieces of the packaging, the ingredients. I talk about the ingredients, very important. It's not just a pretty package, people. And I'm guilty of this myself. In years past, I used to buy fish food. I'd say, okay, I'd look on there, I'd see a picture of the yellow tang, and I say, okay, let me get that one on the shelf as a yellow tang. You gotta read the ingredients. I talk about kelp. There's a lot of cheap brands out there. You wanna look for a reputable brand. Omega-1 makes them. There's some foods made by Ocean Nutrition, San Francisco brands. You want to look at the top brands of food. It's like going to a restaurant. I can speak from experience. You ever go to a restaurant and you order something, let's say you order spaghetti and meatballs. You get the meatballs and you figure out, hey, wow, this meatball is more breadcrumbs than it is meat. Well, the same thing in fish food. You got to look at the ingredients, You want to make sure there's not a lot of excess fish meal, which is one of the things that people use when they're making fish food to kind of fill it and bind it together. The top brands will have a breakdown of how much each product is in the fish food. It'll tell you how much moisture is in the product. It'll say how much clam or how much kelp or how much is in there. If you look at the ingredients on it, they'll always have a breakdown. For instance, you can look at fish food, and this is something I didn't know. They're made with ash, fish oil, and fish oil is one thing. I tested my water. I actually took a certain brand, not here, but I took a brand of flakes and just stirred it around in the water, and then I took the flakes out to see how much oil it released into the water. You'd be absolutely surprised and what a cheap brand of fish food can do to your water. It'll raise your nitrates, it'll raise your phosphate levels, it'll raise ammonia over time, and you'll see that you'll get algae outbreaks. A quarter of the time, more than a quarter of the time, people have algae outbreaks. Sometimes it's the most basic of things, like you're overfeeding your fish, and the food that your fish are not consuming is settling to the bottom of the tank, and it's feeding problematic algae and causing algae outbreaks. So people run out to the store, they buy nitrazole, they buy ammonia products, they buy all these things that you can mix with the water to remove it, when the most basic cause of your problem can be what's in the fish food and the amount that you're feeding. So that's a very important piece of information to know. Get in the habit of reading your ingredients. When you go to the supermarket to buy your stuff, you read the ingredients. Same thing with your fish, starfish, crabs, crayfish, whatever you keep. You want to make sure that if you're feeding a plant consuming food, like I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that there's actually plants in the food. And I have found that some fish foods that I picked up on the market have a picture of an herbivore on it, but they have more fats, proteins, and oils in the food than actual kelp, zucchini, nori, and things that the fish need to be healthy inside the food. So you want to make sure you pay close attention to the packaging and the ingredients. Let's talk about frozen foods. I buy various types of frozen foods. This one in particular is by San Francisco Bay. It's frozen brine shrimp. Even though I keep herbivores in my saltwater tank and I have herbivores in my freshwater tanks, I do feed them a certain amount of meat. Just like us, they need a balanced diet. Same thing with this food. You can look at the back of the packaging. Ingredients, brine shrimp. Check this out, ingredients, brine shrimp. That's what you want to see. So you do want to look at the packaging and look at the ingredients. And this one, for instance, even says it has a breakdown of, you know, the protein, the fat, and the fiber in the product. So it's a good thing to look for, and it'll help you determine which brand is better over the other. I've been using, you know, this product by San Francisco Bay. They've been around a long time. I know Omega 1, I know Ocean Nutrition, I know they have, you know, comparable products. And based on what I feed the fish, I vary the diet. I offer them foods from different manufacturers, but I have my favorites. You know, these tend to be my favorites, you know. The San Francisco brand, the Omega 1, the Ocean Nutrition, and Hikari. I don't have here now, but I feed my betas some Hikari-based product, you know, that's actually formulated for those specific types of fish. So you want to have a mix of different forms of food. It'll keep your fish on the healthy side. You don't want to just feed them one type of food over and over and over again. It kind of gets them into a rut, and you can't turn them off. I found that fish will turn their nose to certain foods. If you feed it, or they'll get sick. They'll get iron deficiency, just like we do. If we don't eat a basic diet of, you know, vegetables, meats, and proteins, you can get anemic, you can get diabetic, too much sugar. We develop sicknesses. Our animals develop the same problems over the course of time. So I feed frozen foods, not more than I can watch them eat in a small amount of time. You know, I feed them flake foods. One important thing with the flake foods that I found, and one of my good friends in, you know, Brooklyn Aquarium Society put me onto that, but I never read the packaging. And one of the foods I actually picked up, and I was reading the packaging, and it said soak in water prior to feeding. And I said, hey, you know something? That makes a lot of sense, because in nature, my fish, like tangs, for instance, they don't swim up to the surface to eat the food. They get the food as it's falling. And I found that even with the Omega 1, which I fed them, I have a small container. I mix a little bit of flakes in the water, and when they see me actually put the container in the water, they'll actually swim right into the container and eat the food. And this way the fish aren't sucking air into their swim bladders. It actually makes the food go below the surface, and they can all eat it, and they can all, you know, they don't fight for it. Some floats a little bit around, but it's actually one of the things I never really took the time to read the packaging, and it said mix with water or feeding instructions. Like this one, for instance, says feed 1 to 3 times a day. Don't feed more than can be eaten in 5 minutes. So that don't mean sit there with a stop clock, but basically there are instructions on these packages, and you know, they'll help you keep a healthy aquarium. You know, feed these several times a day, or using only as much as the fish can consume in 2 minutes. This was at 2 minutes, 5 minutes, but you get the picture. So take the time to read the packaging, whether it be frozen food, pelleted food, or flake food, even the nori sheets. You know, the nori sheets have ingredients, natural dried seaweed. Okay, so now you know when you buy something that has a picture of the fish on it, it's actually what it says it's supposed to be. And this is actually for freshwater or saltwater fish. So this seaweed salad, you know, I feed, this is also made by Sally's, you know, which comes from the San Francisco Bay brand, and my fish like it. I got a lot of information on Omega 1 that actually developed a frozen product, which I look forward to trying out. I'm very happy with their flake food. Ocean Nutrition makes an excellent flake food. Hikari, I use their pellets a lot. I used to keep Oscars, and for those of you that keep Oscars, I would tell you 100%, I don't want to knock the practice, but people love to feed them live fish. There's no bigger cause of parasites in Oscars than feeding them goldfish. A lot of the times the goldfish are sick when you buy them. You get them 20 in a bag for $1. You feed your Oscars sick fish, then all of a sudden your Oscars are sick. I'm a big proponent of feeding live fish, unless of course I raise them myself, which makes me even feel even worse that I'm going to raise fish and then watch them get eaten. So I feed them more, frozen shrimp. They sell the minnows, or I forgot what they call them, but they sell them like spearing in a package. You can cut them up and feed them to your fish. This way you know that they're healthy, they're parasite free, and you don't have to worry about your fish getting sick from eating something live that dies on the bottom or has parasites. So it's very important. Because let me add something else. If you're feeding a live product, let's say you're feeding minnows to your fish, you release them in the water and they have parasites, well guess what? You thought your fish got ick from the water. You may have released ick into the water by feeding them live food. So I'm really much against it. Once again, let me say I did in the past. I fed my fish live minnows and even live clam. You can buy clam live and cut it up and chop it up into pieces and feed your starfish or feed your anemones and your corals. You can feed them live products. But I felt the best way to guarantee that your fish stay healthy is by making sure that the food that you feed them has been tested for parasites and it's been cleaned or filtered or treated with UV or whatever process they utilize to make sure that it's well checked out before you feed it to your fish. So that applies to frozen fish, it applies to flakes, it applies to pellets or any other fish food. So like I said, we go to a restaurant, they have ratings. I know in New York they have A, B, and C ratings on a restaurant. In the packaging, you can determine who makes a good product by what they put in the packaging. So take the time to read the instructions for feeding on the packaging as well as the ingredients. So part 2, let me go into a little bit of application on how to feed the fish food to your fish. Okay, the daylight mode is just kicked into the tank, so I'm going to just give you a quick overview of how I feed my process or how I feed my fish. Let's start with the omega-1, the flakes. My tangs love the flake food. They love the omega-1. I've tried some other brands, which I think they in their own language told me to go bite myself, but I know they love the omega-1. So one of the things is I have this little container. I put the flakes in the container. And oh yeah, if you buy food from the store or your local fish place and that package isn't sealed, take it back. I've had that happen to me. I don't know why or what the packaging is. When I buy fish food, I make sure it's sealed. Vacuum packed, this stuff has a shelf life. You don't want to buy a package that's been used and put back on the shelf, but you want to make sure it's sealed. This one is sealed. I open it because I fed some already. I want to make sure that it's clean and safe for your fish. So basically, I have this little container. I put the flakes. I put a little bit of bloodworms in there. I just started adding a little bit of bloodworms for my clowns. They kind of like it. Or my betas, I feed them separate. But I put it in a little container and I dip it into the water, add a little tank water to it and stir it around. Now what this does is that helps the food sink so that the fish, and when they see this cup, you'll see the fish, they're ready to jump in the cup because they're so used to me feeding them out of the cup. But this way it allows me to feed them a little bit at a time. They love the flakes. It's not going to force them to come up where they're going to suck air into their, suck up surface air into their bladder. But I feed them a little bit. I watch them to make sure that they're eating it all. And then I put them more into the tank and I feed them a little bit at a time. It's important. This keeps you from dirtying your tank and it prevents those algae outbreaks. If I left this cup in there long enough, they'd swim right into the cup. They're kind of used to eating out of the cup now. And that's from reading the instructions. The instructions on the brand said, not this one, but another brand said, add with water prior to feeding. And I said, that makes sense because it keeps them from going to the surface and feeding, and it gets them ready to eat. When they see the cup, they know they're going to eat. So you can do that with frozen food. You can do it with freeze-dried flakes or even pellets. With the pellets, it helps soften the pellets up before you feed it to them. So you can soak it in like the garlic that I talked about. Garlic builds their immune system, builds their appetite. And I use this. I feed like my Kenya tree, which is one of the reasons it's so dang on big. Some of the worms or the flakes I put on the Kenya tree, you'll see the polyps open. You know, my Gregorian over here, I usually use my turkey baster to feed it, but if I put some over there, I've noticed my Gregorian, the polyps will actually catch some of the food, and the fish will eat the remainder, and they love it. So that's how I feed my food to my fish, and it's a good thing for you to take notice of, and just read the instructions on how your food should be added to your tank.